Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very much for making time and joining us this evening. I am Nakul Shenoy. I lead design at Clear, erstwhile Clear Tax. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you here, also all those folks joining us on YouTube. Thank you. We have an exciting evening ahead for you. As you may know, we are going to be releasing Simplify's report on Corporate Board Evaluation 2022. In addition to that, we have two very interesting elements to this evening. We have a panel discussion to deliberate on micro-level practices of what companies do, and a very interesting presentation on the research report on Corporate Board Evaluation 2022, which presents a macro-level practices based on disclosures made by companies in their annual reports. As you may be knowing, Clear acquired Simplify on June 30th, 2022. So it gives us also great pleasure to welcome everybody to the joint family of Clear and Simplify. Thank you very much again for being here. It was a slightly bad day of traffic in Bangalore today. With the introduction of Companies Act 2013, the role of directors, especially independent directors, non-executive directors, and whole-time directors, has come under much deliberation, and Simplify has put together a short booklet on the directors' responsibilities and liabilities. This report will be released today. To take the event forward, let me do a quick introduction to our esteemed guests and panelists. I invite Krishna Kumar Natarajan, popularly known as NKK, to please come onto the stage, sir. NKK is one of the co-founders of Mindtree and was its executive chairman. He is currently the managing partner at Mela Ventures, an early-stage venture capital fund in India. He was appointed as the chairman of NASSCOM for the year 2013-14. An alumnus of College of Engineering, Gundi, and XLRI, he had a long stint with Wipro, where he held multiple leadership roles across different functions. We welcome you, sir. Thank you. I ask Aparna Iyer to please join us on the stage. Aparna Iyer is the Global Corporate Treasurer and Head Investor Relations for Wipro Limited. She is an all-India topper, securing the gold medal in the ICAI examinations. Joining Wipro soon after qualifying as a chartered accountant, she has held several leadership roles in finance functions. Today, she is responsible for investor relations and treasury operations, involving both the money markets and foreign exchange management. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. I request AGS Manikanta to please join us. AGS Manikanta is a qualified company secretary having 2 decades of experience. He has rich experience in various fields such as corporate governance, corporate secretarial, treasury, finance, compliance management, mergers and acquisitions, etc. He is currently working as company secretary of Infosys Limited and oversees the secretarial function of the entire group. He is an active member of FICCI Corporate Law Committee, member of CII Regulatory Affairs Committee, member of Expert Group on Secretarial Standards Board of ICSI, and various other forums. He is a regular speaker at ICSI and other professional circles. Thank you, Mr. Manikanta, for joining us. Our next guest is Ramachandran V. Sir, if you will join us here, please. Ramachandran V is a chartered accountant and a company secretary by qualification and has varied experience of more than 3 decades with multiple companies in corporate law, including mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance and disclosures. His last role was that of Executive Vice President and Company Secretary in Diageo's United Spirits Limited. And prior to that, he was Company Secretary of Wipro Limited for about 12 years. He has also been a regular speaker at various corporate law forums. Post his retirement in June 2020, he is assisting corporate groups on corporate law matters, training programs, and working with a professional group for disinvestment program by Government of India. Mr. Ramachandran, thank you so much for joining us. I now ask our very own founder and CEO of Simplify, Shankar Jagannathan, to please join us on stage. We move directly now into the most awaited part of the evening, which is the release of the report.
One for you also.
No, no. Huh? No part of it. Yeah. No, please, please. Congratulations. No, this is the day of buy one, get one free.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the report and the booklet on Board Evaluation Practices 2022. Thank you so very much.
Many times I think people think of boards as a group of people known to the founders or the management. That view is changing, and increasingly stakeholders expect the board to really be a group which is really protecting the interests of all stakeholders. And in that context, board practices are also becoming more transparent, and every company is trying to adopt best practices. It's really in that context, this study is most appropriate. Because I think as we look around, there is a wide divergence of standards even within Indian companies on what practices they follow for board governance. And to really give them an opportunity, a platform to understand where do they stand in the hierarchy and allow them to come out with initiatives by which they'll improve their good governance practices and really demonstrate to their stakeholders that they're really taking their interests, I think is very important. So I'd really like to congratulate Simplify for having taken this initiative. They've always been a pioneer in this space. We have never had a company which really has digitized the company law for the last several years so that any professional who wants to understand, including me, I see amongst the three, I'm the least qualified in corporate law. Even I could go to their site and really understand some of the issues which I wanted to know about. So having been a pioneer, I think to take action like this and to set the tone for really improving a very key area is important, and certainly they deserve kudos and appreciation for that. Congratulations, Shankar. And thank you so much for all of you for being here.
Thank you, NKK. We move straight into the panel discussion to deliberate on micro-level practices of what companies do. And I ask Shankar to please moderate this.
Good evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure to see so many of friends who have over time have grown into multifaceted relationship. Many of them as our clients who supported the product when we started off with the idea which did not exist in terms of automating the board and shareholder meetings. It's about 8 years since we started the venture in 2014. So we've come a logical point where we are at this point. Looking at a critical aspect of good governance, we always believed compliance was the foundation on which good governance can be built, where we need to look at more the spirit of law as opposed to the letter of law. And in today's event where we are talking of corporate board evaluations, we have done this report. This is the fourth time we are releasing a report on corporate board evaluation. But what companies disclose on board evaluation is like the tip of the iceberg that is visible. There is a huge amount of ice which is lying under the surface. I thought to have a comprehensive view of board evaluation as we see it, it's very critical for us to understand both the micro-level practices that is taking place and supplement it with the disclosures that companies have made, which has come in the form of the report. So I'm extremely delighted that we could have 4 distinguished people with varied exposure who can bring different skill set and exposures that they have with regard to board governance and the corporate governance process. So I will ask a few questions. I will try to be as short in my questions as possible and let them spend more time in terms of talking about their experience. I would like to start off with a question to Mr. Krishna Kumar. He has been chair of the board. He is an independent director on many companies. He's also now a venture capital investor. So I want to hear from his different exposures, what has he seen of corporate board evaluation over the last 7 to 8 years since it has been mandated? And what is it that he would like to advocate going forward on what we need to do with regard to corporate board evaluations?
No, that's a great. No, that's a great question to set this off. In fact, when I saw the, I would say the thrust of this evening, whether it's a compliance ritual or a trigger for good governance, I generally believe that the Companies Act of 2013, which mandated it, was clearly necessary because I think managements and companies weren't really realizing the responsibility which a board had on governance. While that has been done, as I watch companies, I would really put them into 3 buckets. There is still a significant part of both listed and unlisted companies. If you talk about the 7,000 listed companies, probably Sriram would be a better person to give real statistics on this. There are significant numbers which are just wanting to put a tick in the box. And how does that translate into action? This process of board evaluation is really as a task, in some cases I found left to the HR department, left to the secretarial department, so a spreadsheet is made, and purely the job is to ask directors to fill that in. And then it is recorded in the minutes saying a board evaluation was done, all directors are asked to think. To me, I still think 60% of Indian companies are in what I call a ritual mode of just complying with that. And I think a lot more education needs to go in terms of the real value of an exercise like this, which is where I think studies and reports like this would really make a big difference. I certainly have seen 15-20% of the companies wanting to improve, and they try and see what is it that they need to do to improve, but do not have enough of expertise or people really advising them on how do they go about improving both the governance process as well as the board process. Again, in my mind, while a lot of the consulting companies have started seeing this as another nice source of revenue, I find uniformly all of them are average. I don't want to take specific names. I think all of them are uniformly average. Partly because I think people coming in are consultants and not necessarily people who have been in boards, have understood what the limitations are and how can they bring in their experience to help boards improve. But there is a desire on the management to improve, where again I think they need help. But the last 10% is boards which I think are doing a fabulous job. They are very clear they need to keep improving. I clearly think companies like Infosys and others have set a standard for that. So I think that tip of 10% which is really driving the action on this, more needs to be really publicized about them to the others so that people can start learning from the experience. So my expectation is that I think the top 10% of companies which are doing a fabulous job, they should start becoming really ambassadors of propagating how important board governance is, running the board process in an effective manner, and then really influencing the balance of them. I think that's a great behavioral change which I think we should start trying to drive.
Thank you. I thought the next question, logically, I thought I should ask to Mr. Manikanta. There are three critical players as far as board evaluation is concerned. One is the board itself, which is critical. Second is the compliance professional who assists the board in the compliance process. So this is a question I'm directing to you as a professional. Prior to it being mandated in by 2013 Act, we did not see almost any company in India doing board evaluation and publicizing their results. So in the last 7 years as a professional, what do you think has been the journey of Indian companies from the professional side that you have seen in corporate board evaluation? And the second point I wanted to look at and ask was, are there occasions where the importance of board evaluation either goes up or down, whether it's a bull market or a bear market? Does it have any influence on the kind of board evaluation practices that happen? So would be interested in knowing your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Shankar. Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Shankar. I think that's a great question. I don't know how to come back, and let me try and justify that. First of all, before I get into the question, many congratulations to you for releasing these reports and all the great things which you are doing, especially like Mr. Krishna Kumar said about simplifying the whole thing of the Companies Act. So it's a fabulous job. Thanks for that. So on the Companies Act, as all of us know, so in the 2015, this came out as a checkbox exercise where the law actually mandated every company to come out and do this evaluation of the board. So that's the starting point. I think as a regulator, that's what you can give a start line, right? Then I think it's up to the companies of how will you take it forward. If you see the trajectory of the last 7 years, I think there are many people who have started that journey and they have picked up very nicely. And broadly, I would like to divide this into 3 aspects. One is the purpose, and then is the process, and also on the people. The board evaluation actually is a composition of these 3. Now, what is purpose? Now, purpose, we all know why the board exists or the committee exists. Now, if you're doing a board evaluation on the purpose, so therefore you are satisfying what is your stated objectives, either in your charters or in your or the law, what is expected. So therefore, you are doing an evaluation of the board in that direction. So therefore, you are satisfying the purpose part of it. And then comes to the process, right? The process is how many meetings did you conducted, how did you do that, and what are the methodologies which is used, whether the checklist approach, the consultant approach, etc. So that's the second part of it. And the third part of it is the people. The people are the board members, right? So therefore, how are they contributing it? And how are they contributing to the strategy of the company, or how they themselves have performed against their goals which they have stated upfront. Now, if you do this evaluation of all these 3 parameters, and then comes the disclosure part, where you see the nutshell which is produced in the annual report at the end of the report. So in this journey, I think Mr. Krishna Kumar also explained, there are many people who are at the start of the event, there are many people who are in the middle of the race, and there are few people who are actually at the fag end of the race. So I think this is a journey. I'm very hopeful that this will be picked up. There are international regulations or the best practices as well, where certain jurisdiction, especially in the UK, this actually has a lot of further steps. Probably there is something which we can learn from there.
Most people who focus on governance tend to do it for a return. So one of the key players in the entire governance system is the investors, especially the institutional investors. So I have here with me Aparna, who heads the investor relations for a company that's listed both in India and US. So I want to ask you, in your interaction with investors, especially institutional investors, how much of the discussion centers around good governance? And in good governance, is there any specific reference that people make to corporate board evaluation? And two, is there a difference between the kind of questions and the attention you get from Indian investors as opposed to international investors?
Yeah. First of all, congratulations, Shankar. And, I think it's an honor to be in the august company of this panel. So thank you for giving me an opportunity. To your point, yes, corporate governance is perhaps one of the most fundamental criteria and is at the very core of any investment strategy, especially the pedigree of investors that we seek, people who have a long-term orientation towards the investment, more medium to long-term, foreign and domestic institutionals that we would like to have, in our roster of investors. For them, corporate governance is table stakes, and it becomes, the fundamental criteria with which they evaluate a company. Because, corporate governance is perhaps a single factor which can actually determine how sustainable the business is and how eventually, they last the course, right? So from that standpoint, it is very fundamental. And therefore, it is at the heart of things. What was your second question on?
Is there a difference between the
Yes.
approach of, let's say, foreign institutional investor versus
Yeah,
an Indian
absolutely.
investor? And
Yeah.
does it make a difference?
Yes, if you look at it, European investors are far more ahead in the race as compared to, let's say, even practices like ESG. Today, it's no longer only about the governance. It's a more holistic approach, right? People want to weave in, how are you as a corporate citizen, both in terms of, what are you doing with the environment, how sustainable are your practices, compared to, what you're doing in the society. So fundamentally, when you take who's ahead in terms of these trends, typically European investors, institutional investors are certainly ahead, and it is far more important to them, and the kind of questions that they ask us are definitely more soul-searching as compared to, let's say, and then, of course, a lot of the US and Canadian, the long-only pension funds, they tend to have a more long-term approach, and therefore it's far more critical. I think Asian investors and Indian investors are still catching up. For them, perhaps right now, it's more like a tick in the box in terms of, okay, no negative news is okay, is good news. And they would look at it like a fundamental hygiene. But for the European investors, they are perhaps shaping the trends as far as ESG and is concerned. You had asked a question to him about, whether there is a difference between the bull market and the bear market, right? And I just wanted to, bring in a perspective that, bull markets typically have that, what they refer to as the excessive exuberance, right? And that typically tends to hide the fault lines that are there, right? But, with the sobriety that, bear markets bring in, they bring back attention to fundamentals. And that's when, you are able to have a certain premium attached to good corporate governance. So certainly, in a bearish market, the attention to corporate governance and therefore your ability to differentiate versus the others is better. But I would say, and therefore it brings back, the old-fashioned fundamentals. But other than that, like I said, it's pretty core and fundamental to investors when they are looking at long-term strategy.
Thank you. Thank you, Aparna.
Sorry, I did not answer your second part of the question. No, so I think whether it is a bull market or a bear market, I'll just add to what Aparna was saying. See, board evaluation is something which is not seen by a short-term investor. This is more long-term vision, right? So therefore, a person who is coming you as a long-term investor is going to stay. The people who are looking for a return which is consistent return over a period of time, irrespective whether it is a bull market or a bear market, they will definitely want to know what is happening inside your company. So therefore, on the topic of board evaluation, it becomes extremely important, and there is a lot of emphasis which is on the board to self-govern themselves and report back to the investor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mani. Ram, I'll take advantage of the fact that you are less constrained by practical considerations of having a job and reporting to a boss. So let's get a little bit into the realm of imagining what could possibly be the best. And given your wide exposure in terms of both in Indian companies and multinational companies spread over almost 3 decades, can I ask you to outline some of the basic principles that you see which would make for the ideal board evaluation system as you would like to see it?
Okay, thank you. There is nothing called an ideal sort of an evaluation. It's just an aspiration. And it's an evolving area. For example, some people recommend saying that an external agency is ideal. You have independence, etc. But I don't agree with that, because that's, again, as Mr. Krishna Kumar said, that it's not necessary that an external expert brings a level of, I should say, a fairness or an independence which is much better than if it is done internally. No. So, having said that, what is the ideal? Ideal in the sense, close to ideal, is that you should say that what is it that's a good evaluation? A good evaluation is one where you have a feedback which is fair, a feedback which is transparent and unbiased, and a feedback which is taken also in that same manner. So if there is a feedback which is very difficult to convey and it doesn't go to the other side, to the director or to the board, etc., then that's not the kind of evaluation which results in good sort of an outcome. So I would say that you need to have a good feedback system, an environment where there is an ability or a willingness to give a frank feedback, and what should I say, maturity of the person who is receiving the feedback to take that feedback and improve upon it. I think that's very important. If these elements are there, you can probably lead towards a good evaluation. But ideal evaluation, I would say, is still a very, very long way away.
Mr. Krishna Kumar, this question is more for you. Since I have been both in a large company and been in a startup, and you are a venture capital investor now, do you see any value of corporate board evaluation for startup ventures to be able to look at, introspect in terms of their board processes and seek improvement? Or you think corporate board evaluation comes only at a right age or a right stage where the company's business is mature and profitable, and they have to answer to a larger number of investors as opposed to a handful of investors who could be communicated with on a much more regular basis?
See, I think there are stages in the company. In fact, in many of the companies, since we are at Mela largely in early stage investing, even the basic rigor of having a board, having an independent person on the board itself is not there. And many times we find that the CEO has just like that compensated himself without having a formal review through an NRC. So I think in the early stage, it's important to have really the basic hygiene of how a board is to be run. I think certainly at a stage when the company is growing, potentially wanting to go to an IPO, I think that's the stage when they really have to start thinking in terms of a board evaluation. On a personal level, I'm someone who's very, very, in fact, supportive of the idea of having an independent chair. Because I think that really, in a way, segregates governance and management and really starts inculcating in the culture and muscle tone of the startup that governance should become a very important process. Because many founders whom I meet really say, oh, I'll do it just before going IPO or not. Because governance is not something which is an add-on. You need to build it in as a part of your culture, as a part of your ethos. So I think getting into a more nuanced approach like board evaluation is really absolutely critical when the company is starting to grow and wanting to really reach out to a larger segment of stakeholders.
Thank you. So I hope we have a product called Simply Best, which automates the process of corporate board evaluation. I think with your words, I think we can start to address those companies which have reached, let's say, B stage or C stage funding and encourage them to do. And I hope investors like you insist as a shareholder condition for them to do a board evaluation using Simply Best.
Conditions precedent.
Using Simply Best, that should also be there.
Of course, you need to use the best product, and what better than Simply Best?
Nicely plugged in.
So I have been told, every report of ours, the 5th page should be an ad. So, Mani, this is a question where I've seen, especially I, in the last 5 years, would have interacted with at least about 600 to 700 company secretaries as I've gone my marketing calls. One of the critical challenge I see is many company secretaries do not know how to deal with board evaluation with their board. Given your experience as a company secretary, what are those 2 or 3 do's and don'ts that you would like to advise to a young professional when it comes to board evaluation? What should the young professional do or not do so that they contribute to an effective board evaluation?
Shankar, you mentioned about this 1:1, so I will give 3 suggestions instead of 2. So as a professional, especially the company secretary, you are actually in a very sweet spot, right? Nobody else has this sweet spot in the organization to understand the nuances of the board. Therefore, a company secretary can actually do the service in 3 ways or in 3 stages. Now, one is before the evaluation itself, there is a process what you can do, right? So right from identifying the process of how you want to evaluate, what needs to be done, how will you take the NRC approval for setting up the whole ecosystem or the board evaluation parameters or the criteria what you mentioned, and discussing with your NRC and discussing with your board of what are the priorities, what needs to be put together, what is our focus area, or what is that we have to evaluate for this particular year. So that is the one set where even before the evaluation starts, you can contribute. And then comes the evaluation stage itself. Now, in the evaluation stage itself, as a professional, you can actively participate. You can participate in 2 ways. Either you can be the part of the assessor itself. That is one way of doing it. Second is, you can be the person who can give the feedback. In a 360-degree feedback when you do a board evaluation, you're also one of the contributor where you can provide your insights, right? So that's a second way where you can contribute to the board evaluation at the time of the evaluation itself. And post the evaluation, there are so many things which you need to do, because what you do as an evaluation, there is an outcome, there is a feedback, there is an action plan which is coming out of that evaluation. Therefore, first of all, taking down what are the actions, somebody has to track it for the board, right? So to do their things. So therefore, as a professional, you have a duty to jot down or list down the actions and then go after it and chase that. Whatever needs to be done for that, you can do it. So that is one. And the second also is about the disclosures. There are so many things which you have the annual report expects you to disclose. The Companies Act and the listing regulations requires you to put across in the annual report. So therefore, what has the deliberation, what is the methodology which you have adopted, also can be summarized in a meaningful manner where the investors can consume. So those are the 3 things which I think a professional has to look at it.
Sure, please.
No, I think what Mani shared is really a very robust process happening in what I call the top 10%. But I must be honest, I want to raise a little more controversial point. I don't think top managements adequately recognize the key role which a company secretary plays. It's very interesting. I was asking one of the CEOs saying, who's their company secretary? He's struggling to even call out the name. So I think we have to create a fertile ground for top management to realize the criticality of this role, create the environment, because if they don't do that, you'll never reach what the top 10% has achieved. And I think what Infosys or Wipro has achieved is because of an intent of the top management to govern well. If that fertile ground is not created, then companies will not reach anywhere.
Thank you. So this is one of the points that repeatedly I get. See, many times they are not even heard.
Yeah.
they don't even get an opportunity to talk. So the question is, how do they create a platform by which they are able to talk? So many times they say, will you come and tell them what is to be done? It can't be done by a third person unless the promoter recognizes the importance of the person who is talking. So it's an excellent point. I think somewhere as a professional group, we need to create that.
You have to do your role, all of us have to do that.
So this one question, Aparna, I had in terms of the disclosure that we make on governance, because what people know is only what is told to them or what they see. So as a head of investor relations working with the compliance team, what are the areas or what is the kind of interaction that you have in terms of the quality of disclosure that is made to the investors in general, and disclosures made in the annual report? What kind of a role you play, and is there any specific emphasis that you pick on from time to time so that we get a better valuation or better recognition of what we do?
I think, fundamentally, today the way, we look at corporate board evaluation is what is laid out in the regulatory requirements, right? And I think the disclosures are very, very, aligned to what is the basic minimum that's required. But if you look at the way investors look at this, they look at it like a lead indicator for a vibrant, having a vibrant board is a prerequisite for good corporate governance, right? And therefore, they would like to know how vibrant is the board, right? The kind of questions that we get from our investors. They want to understand the demographics. They want to understand, does the board really accurately represent, the global company that we aspire to be? Do we have ethnic diversity? Do we have gender diversity? Is our board capable of spotting and understanding the risks of a future world? Whether it is pertaining to cybersecurity or privacy, everything is changing so quickly. So in some sense, they would like to know, is your board equipped to really add value to your strategy, add value to that, the technology vision that you would have, right? So in some sense, I think the role of the investor relations team is actually to channelize the questions that we get from our investors into, how they are fundamentally looking at it when they are laying down those criteria by the GNR committee on, what kind of board members should you have and how should they be evaluated. I think, we become an important segue in order to, just channelize that expectations back to them and see how we can be transparent. Investors value a lot of detailed disclosures, especially while voting on important decisions related to the board, right? So in some sense, we are fully engaged in terms of understanding whether the disclosure is good enough and how can it be made more transparent, and how do we communicate that back to the investors with full clarity on what we have said, so that they are able to, view it in that spirit, right? And they're able to see not just like the 10% tip, so also what goes beneath. So that's how, I would look at it.
Ram, it goes without saying that almost 99% of the companies use questionnaires for board evaluation, because focus group discussion and those things are still in the realm of ideas, not yet implemented. So when questionnaire becomes the key criteria, is there any suggestions or is there any experience that you have of how questions can be used to create an effective and efficient board evaluation system?
Okay. You're right. The questionnaire is the method which is widely used, even by professionals who come from external agencies. They also use the same questionnaires. Now, questionnaires basically capture the basic board functioning, the expectations from the board, the constitution, etc., participation by the board members, interactions, openness, and the liaison with the management, etc. But what the questionnaires tend to do is, obviously, if you have some 5 questions and then each of them has some 3 or 4 sub-questions, you tend to rate them maybe 1:4, 4 being the best, or 1:5, 5 being the best. Now, just like employee appraisals in the companies, if it is 1:5, then you tend to have majority in number 3, the 3 rated. In boards, generally, they are much more, liberal, And it tends to be somewhere around 4 or 5. If you reduce it to 4 scale, it will be somewhere around 3 to 4. And so if you want to evaluate the board, if you want to evaluate the directors, previous year it must have been 3.7, this year it will be 3.79. What do you make of it? So while the questionnaire does give you a direction, but it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't tell you as to where we are we improving, are we not improving. What really I've seen really helpful is that I would answer the question in 3 parts. For the board evaluation and the committee evaluation, ideally one should get a feedback after the board meeting because that is fresh, on the spot feedback, which later on I have seen that to be very helpful in board level evaluations later on at the end of the year. After each meeting, ask those questions which you want to ask, for example, on the contents, on the interactions, on the participation, on the timeliness and whatnot. And you can also ask further questions saying that any other feedback, etc. That is something which is helpful at the end of the year. Similarly, as far as the individual director evaluation is concerned, I have seen, apart from, of course, giving marks in the peer evaluation, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then comparing, the director who gets it, he won't be able to make out as to, have I improved, is there anything which I need to do? But there comes the importance of qualitative feedback. And the qualitative feedback, I would say the recommendation should be that, one, that make it anonymous. Don't write the director's name in the piece of paper, or I think it's online, I don't think you can actually preserve it. But if it's a piece of paper, then ideally don't write the name of the director who is giving the feedback. Don't capture it. Capture it somewhere with some code word or something. This is number one, because I've often seen that in personal meetings, the interactions will be much better than a video meeting because it's recorded. People are slightly more conscious in giving the frank feedback. So one, mask that names, etc. And number two, specifically don't leave the qualitative questionnaire, any other comment, give the marks and then any other comment. Invariably people leave it blank. But ask specific 2 questions. About each of the directors. I suppose, let's say A and B are evaluating C, then ask this question: what are the 2 things which he is doing well, which he should continue to do well, and what are the 2 things which he needs to improve? I think you will get fabulous replies, which you can summarize, which none of these meaningless ratings will give you an answer to. So these, I think, I have seen to be much more effective than the usual questionnaires.
Thank you. Very insightful. Learned quite a bit. I thought we'll do one quick fire round with all of you, saying if there is one thing you could mandate on corporate board evaluations, what would it be? We'll start with NKK. If there's one thing you would mandate, what would it be?
One, the board should really share with all stakeholders what are the 2 or 3 actions which they've taken arising out of the board evaluation. Because today there's no accountability in terms of actions taken.
Well, at the board level, as RK said, that acting on those feedbacks. And I don't know to what extent you can disclose. For example, let's say if there is a takeover, if the board says, fine, for our strategy, we should have more of takeovers, etc. Will that strategy be made published? I have my own doubts. That's why I don't agree with the SEBI guidance note in 2017, where they said, actually, you should have your strategy be made public. So I don't agree with that. So to what extent you can disclose, that's one part. But then, yes, there has to be some action that it has to be acted upon. And then also to create some kind of an environment to get that kind of a feedback. I think that's something which should be there.
Mani?
No, I actually subscribe to the thought of Mr. Ram. So I think there is in the board evaluation, there is a lot of feedback or the action points which comes in, right? So first of all, whether you are living up to your own actions, right? As a group, you have decided something which you wanted to accomplish. But therefore, have you lived up to that expectation or not is something which can be reassessed in the next year. And that becomes a very important point. So none of the others are giving you goals. You are setting your own goals. And if you're not living up to that, then there is a lot of problem.
Make it more data dependent. I know Ram said that, it doesn't make a difference whether you say 3.7 or 3.79. But if there is a way to really make it more data-led disclosure, so as to really, give a quantitative score and have a very standardized way of evaluation and coming up with a score, it can also help driving standardization across all companies, right? So in some sense, maybe what gets measured improves, right? So in some sense, more transparency on what value, what criteria was used and where you're faring. And then, of course, all of everything else that he said, keeping a very safe zone for proper feedback and how are you following through on actions. Things like that will help.
Thank you very much. I thought since we have such a large combined wisdom in this room, if there's any one or two people who want to make their insights on corporate board evaluation, I would welcome them to share it so that we can spend the next 5 minutes in terms of their insights so that it can be helpful to the entire team. Anyone would like to?
To NKK, of course. Why is there so much of hesitation among board members to get themselves evaluated?
See, I must say already the independent directors have a lot of onerous responsibilities. So beyond that, when already there's an evaluation. But I must be honest, I think people are not hesitant to have that evaluation. But if that evaluation is not giving them feedback in terms of what should I be doing differently, if it's not effective, then I think people have that hesitation. But wherever I think it's given them a proper feedback, I think it worked very well. In one of the companies there, I think the process was after the evaluation was done, the independent directors looked at all the feedback, made an action plan in terms of saying these are the top 4 priorities which we need to look at next year. And since the chairman was also not an independent chairman, there was a session with the chairman giving him feedback and taking him feedback from him in terms of what did he see expectations of independent directors and wherever we failed and wherever we need to improve. So I think it's a constant dialogue and the ability to take that feedback and act, which needs to be in an effective manner.
One observation and one, maybe 2 observations. So one is that, as I understand, board is a group of people coming from diverse experience zones. Somebody has a marketing focus, R&D focus, experience, people management, etc., etc. And all of them meet too infrequently. But yet they have to work cohesively, effectively, to contribute to the betterness of the company. Like we do it for employees evaluation, where he evaluates the boss, he evaluates the peer, he evaluates himself and gets the evaluation from all. It is similarly required of the board of directors because they are also working as a team for a better purpose, to be more effective. Now, some of the findings may not be what I believe is right against me or for me, but it is important for me to appreciate that A, thinks I am aggressive, B, thinks I am not expressive, C, thinks I am not being a subject matter expert, talking enough, or too much talking. Now, all of this is important, whether I agree with that observation or not, that's not right or wrong, but I have to work with these 5 people, 10 people, and 20 people. So how can be more effective? And that moderates or that allows you to be more effective in our communication and therefore the resultant output. Now, consequently, this stuff that you just talked about, which is people think about it to have a had just before the IPO, not earlier. To my mind, it should be right day one. You and me start working tomorrow, putting 100 rupees each and starting a business. We will be operational saying, did you do this, did I do this, etc., etc. But sitting on a quarterly basis or an annual basis and say, KK, you did this right, you didn't do this right, you could have done this better. And similarly, you, Suresh, you could do this, that helps. And whether it's a 2-people team or a 10-people team or a 200, 300,000 people team, what matters for the employees equally matters for the board. Attendance system. I mean, typically I say I'm a CEO of the company, I don't have to go to swipe, but all the employees do. Why? When the board of directors themselves are required to give an absence, attendance. Leave of absence, which means a leave to be authorized by the board. Shankar is not coming this time because A, B, C, the chairman approves, or who's over the rest of the board members. So these are certain disciplines which at an employee policy framework point of view you have. In the board, you tend to be, over-positioning yourself. And in some form, these are processes mandated for it to be practiced. How much you practice, how much you disclose, I don't think matters. For example, if the rating goes up by 1 point extra, 2 point extra, your rating, I'll keep giving you 5, somebody will give you 4, somebody will give you 3 because these standards are much more tighter. Therefore, you don't go by as long as I'm consistent. And that disclosure doesn't matter. What matters is, are you using that forum in an effective manner to be able to contribute better to the company? One more practice that I found, and I'm glad Ram pointed out, but one more thought I thought was, while in the board, an independent directors having a meeting of their own without the executive management, and independent directors meeting the chairman, if he's an executive chairman, independent of the board, and some of those does help. And similarly, board meetings with the audit committee meetings with the auditors without the management being there. Very important forums. Again, you could, I think some of this has now become, because we have been practicing much earlier, some of this has become standard. Some of this are still on the ticking the box, but how the chairman of those committees, when you have those meetings, or productiveness of when the executive chairman meets with the independent directors, seeking views. Not that I know how to run it, so your feedback is not good enough, or you don't know how to run businesses, etc., etc. It is not helpful. The very fact that by invitation you have these board members, you should be able to get contribution from them. And the final thing is that when you give this feedback, constructive, and let's say I got certain feedbacks, I could meet individuals and say, this is what it is coming out, what is your feeling? What is your feeling? What is your feeling? And that helps you to get a better perception, clarity. No, suppose A says, no, I don't think that's a problem with you. Somebody says, well, maybe you need to moderate. So that helps when you reach out to those people and get that particular view for you to be a better performer. Thank you.
Thank you. Earlier, we were very simple. Now we are clearly simple. So, as a token of our appreciation to the panelists, can I request...
Before that, can we just ask all of you to just stand up and we'll
Sure.
take a group picture?
Sure,
And,
thank you.
Thank you. I ask Shankar to give a token of our appreciation to Krishna Kumar Natarajan. Thank you, sir, for making time. To Aparna Iyer. Thank you, ma'am, for making time and being here with us. To Mr. Ramachandran. And Mr. Manikanta. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. May I request you all to come back and take your seats. Thank you so much.
Can you switch? No, I'll use this. Yeah?
Now we move to the last part of the official part of the evening. We have an interesting presentation by Shankar on the research report that you just received. So, Shankar, over to you.
Okay. Good evening. We have been, when we started Simplify, one of the things that made this job a pleasure for me is to conceive of research report and publish them. So this is the 19th report that we have published in last 7 years. And on corporate board evaluation, this is the 4th report. So what I believe is a longitudinal study is very critical, using the same parameters, same kind of population to be able to trace the progress. And this report is the 4th report. Similarly, we have 3 such. One is on secretarial practice, other one is on corporate secretarial audit, and third one is on board evaluation. So other than this, we have done on varied topics where, again, repeating may not make sense, but these 3 we thought we should make. So one of the critical... Thanks. So one of the critical thing as a corporate historian, what I have seen is all governance practices follow a trend of a pioneer who adopts a practice based on an intrinsic belief. Then there is a major corporate scandal that takes place where the regulators search for solution. And they hit upon the pioneer who has done that. Then they come and recommend. Initially, especially in the last 30 years, most of these governance recommendations have been in the nature of comply or explain, giving a little bit of freedom for people to understand the new concept that is being spoken about. And over a period of time, as companies continue to adopt and learn, that is when the companies begin to start mandating. The regulator begins to mandate. And corporate board evaluation was no different. For people who remember early 90s were the era of hostile takeovers in United States. Especially The Barbarians at the Gate is the most famous book and novel that made it so popular. This was also the period of hostile takeover. So one company, Campbell Soup Company, was one of the companies which started evaluating its own governance practice and for the first time started disclosing their corporate board evaluation practice and improvement areas identified by the board. So this was published by Business Week in 1995, heralding it as one of the unique practices in corporate governance. Around the same time in Canada, 3 life insurance companies went under. So there was a famous committee that was appointed under the chairmanship of Day. The report is better known as Where Were the Directors? ? So the 3 life insurance companies had invested so much in real estate that when the real estate market collapsed, they were not able to fulfill the promise that they had made to their policy holders. And when this committee came out with recommendation of 14 governance parameters, the 5th of the governance parameter was in terms of corporate board evaluation. From there, it was a matter of time before rest of the world took it and made it in terms of a mandate that we have seen today. So when you look at it in terms of the process that needs to get followed, Indian law is very clear on the process that we need to follow. There are 5 steps that has to be done before the disclosure can be made. I do not know how many companies actually go through this process. First is there is a nomination committee that must meet and recommend the criteria and the process to be followed. Then the board has to meet and look at the consideration and adopt it with or without modification. Then the process of board evaluation gets set in. After the board evaluation is complete, there is a board meeting again, which is met to independent directors meeting, which looks at the results and decides what of the action to be taken forward with the board. Then the board considers the final evaluation results and then recommends what is to be disclosed in the annual reports to the shareholders, and that gets done. So this process is very clearly envisaged, and a company needs to do, a normal listed company needs to do something like between 10 to 11 evaluations in a year. So this process becomes, because you have to do for a board, you have to do for all the subcommittees, then you have to do for each of the individual directors. So this makes it almost about 10 to 11 board evaluations, and this becomes in terms of clear for you to be able to spend adequate time to be able to do this. So in 2015, when we started the first study, we looked around the world to see which is the country or which is the geography where the practice is mature. We found that Europe was leaps ahead of United States or the Asian governance practices. From there, we evolved a proprietary model for corporate governance evaluation, where we said we should get to a 5-star evaluation. So what is a 5-star evaluation? We said a 5-star evaluation is one where a company knows what is the process that it's following, what is the criteria it is using, discloses what are the favorable outcomes of the board, discusses what are the improvement areas that is identified by the board, and has an action plan for implementing that. So we said these are the 5 stars, and I said if these are the 5 stars, can we rank? Initially we took the 100 companies and then ranked it. Then we have brought it down to Nifty 50 companies in the belief that Nifty 50 companies represent the kind of practices that Indian companies are either following or would follow in a period of time, being the lead indicators of that. So when we did this first exercise over the last 5 years, you can see here, initially most of the companies were primarily focused on process followed and the parameters used. It's not a surprise to see that this being the highest reported area, for the simple reason that mandate requires you to disclose on these two. Whereas the other three, in terms of favorable outcome, improvement areas, and action plan, was not to that extent mandated, and therefore it was something that few companies did and few other companies did not do. If you see in the initial year, improvement areas, there's not a single company that reported on improvement areas. And logically, if there is no improvement area, then logically there is no action point that's coming out of it. And when you're looking at when you're looking at it here, you can see the kind of trend that we have seen, how the companies have improved over the period in the 5-year period, where companies which were focused primarily on process and criteria gradually begin to report on compliance. And improvement area is one thing that I see even in employee interviews. You ask, no, what is your improvement area? Very often people say positive things which is disguised as negative. I believe only a confident person can share the real improvement area. And second is only a person who can share improvement area that he knows where he has to improve to get better. If you have never thought of improvement before, you cannot think of improvement in that board meeting or in that employee interview. So it's a great reflection on a person to be able to identify improvement areas and work on it. And that is something we are increasingly seeing Indian companies more and more begin to start doing. So if you look at it here, there was a lot of discussions we had on what are 2 enablers for good board evaluation. We have seen one that, first critical element is in terms of free and frank disclosure. So if there is no free and frank disclosure, there's absolutely no board evaluation. And one of the critical things that is responsible for free and frank evaluation is the ability to provide anonymity of response. So just look at elections. If in elections, in public elections, if everyone could know what you voted for, what's the kind of results you would get, the ruling party will always win every time. So here also we see the use of technology as a critical factor which enables getting free and frank disclosure. One of the critical things is using technology by itself is not adequate. The technology must be built in such a way that no one should be able to identify who has given the disclosure. It's not even a system administrator in the company or the company secretary, someone who's doing it. So that's where the key to use technology, where you de-link the minute a person has given response to the thing. You also build in factors like saying if only one person has responded, the response will not be revealed at all. Unless 2 people or 3 people respond, you will not even be able to see what the response is. So providing in terms of that anonymity makes for effective feedback, and we are seeing in terms of how the companies are increasing in terms of their use of technology here. Saying, it's starting at small, like in terms of first year 0 to now about 8 companies using technology. Similarly, the use of external consultants. The external consultant use need not be every year, but at least once in 2 to 3 years, like UK requires every 3 years a consultant be used. The need for consultant is to refresh the process, bring in external practices which are best practices and imbibe it into the company so that the company is in a position to be able to do it. So these 2 factors we see as critical enablement, and in India we are seeing less than about 20% of companies in India following this, but it's a matter of time before you see more and more companies begin to adopt this. The next one you look at is in terms of the rating of 5-star. When you look at it on a 5-star basis, initial years, exempt in India, public sector companies are exempt from board evaluation because there is a ministry which does the evaluation of directors. So if you remove them as exempt, then you can see rest of the companies. So initially you see in terms of 1-star rating and 2-star rating dominate. Gradually, if you see over the last few years, you are seeing in terms of 4-star and 5-star companies begin to come up. And if you take a combination of the 2, in our second study, we had 10 companies. In our third study, we had 12 companies. In our fourth study, which is now, we have had about 14 companies between 4-star and 5-star, which is there. So that means these companies are not only disclosing improvement areas, they are also disclosing in terms of the action plan for implementing those disclosure areas. Then coming to the status as it stands as far as 2022 is concerned, in terms of the companies which have published their annual report in the current calendar year, we can see here there are 10 companies which have reported in terms of 5-star. This is the trend to go. As people see more and more companies sharing in terms of improvement areas and action plan, it's a matter of time before others start to do it. We think we are on a good wicket as far as the movement is concerned. So it's our ability to be able to take it further from there so that we have in terms of effective board evaluation that takes place. Then when you look at it, we not only did our research, but we also in our discussions, we found a few critical factors that contribute to effective board evaluation. The number of questions you have in the questionnaire makes a huge difference to the quality of response you get. Typically, in the first few years, you see companies coming up with 30, 40 questions. Then they begin to realize after the second questionnaire, the person is blindly ticking it. So for effective board evaluation, you cannot have more than 12 to 15 questions for you to have focused point so that you are able to get the attention and be able to do that. Second is in terms of quantifiable answers. So qualitative answers have their own place, and ability to get a measurement across different people so that you are able to get some kind of average becomes critical. So the ability to convert the answers, at least most of the answers, into something quantifiable, where you can get an average, where you can get a mean, median, mode, becomes critical, while you also need to use, like what Ram said, in terms of supplement it with few open-ended questions. So the third question that we see is, this makes the single biggest factor. Companies, if they have to identify improvement areas, there has to be anonymity of response. In most cases where the promoter decides whether you continue on the board or not, it becomes very counterproductive to give a critical feedback, however constructive it may be. So the anonymity becomes here in terms of clear, it becomes key, and this is where we see the use of technology playing a critical role. We have tried to do some correlation between companies reporting on improvement areas and technology. At this point of time, it shows larger number of companies which use technology have improvement areas opposed to companies which are not you, but that is still not conclusive enough. Then when you look at the other one is in terms of engaging the specialist. The need to engage specialists comes from two critical areas. Today, if you take the amount of time companies spend on corporate board evaluation, about 60 to 70% of time primarily goes in the process of filling up the questionnaire. Whereas what you need is more time spent on deciding on the criteria and process, and more time spent on analyzing the results of board evaluation, with the actual process of evaluation itself taking not more than 50% of the time. So your ability to engage a specialist ensures that you spend adequate time on criteria and process, and also spend adequate time deliberating the actions that is coming out of the board evaluation that's there. And the last one, like I said, is even if you don't use an external consultant, there's a critical need for you to have in terms of at least 30 to 40% of the time allocated for identification of criteria and process, and final decisions and quality of disclosure that you need to make for you to have the board evaluation. I always go back to one point that I have seen: people learn with their eyes and not with their ears. So you can tell people to improve, take feedback, be open to suggestions and other things. If board as the apex decision-making body is not doing it themselves, then it becomes tough for rest of the team to be able to do. The minute the board itself as the apex body opens itself up to scrutiny, does the evaluation, and is confident enough to share the improvement areas, identify action and implement it, there is no reason why rest of the team should not be in a position to be able to do what they have seen their own leaders do. This I see like a tiara that can be used by companies. The minute they do an effective board evaluation and disclose it, they can use that to drive that kind of culture into rest of the organization. This is what, in terms of we wanted to share. The report itself is available. We have some hard copies here. Soft copies will be mailed and also be available on our website. The report, in addition, also contains all the relevant extracts and of both the act and the regulation in one place, so that it's readily available. Second, we also have the process flow described, because in many cases people ask why we should spend so much of time. One is there's a legal requirement for you to spend it, and two, if you want to do an effective process, you have to follow that process. Otherwise, it's going to be a tick box based approach. The third one is in terms of, we also felt that if there is a model disclosure available, it would be helpful for people to use. It's like Maggi noodles. We have created something. It's not something as an end in itself, but you can use it to build on it and make significant. So we have come out both with a model board evaluation policy and also model disclosures that company can do, so that they get to 5-star, 6-star, and 7-star disclosures. So I believe that from what I have seen, at least in the last 30 years of my life, in the corporate world, corporate disclosure has significantly gone up. The amount of disclosure is unbelievable. 20 years back, 25 years back, you couldn't get annual reports of companies. Today you can get by paying 100 rupees annual report of any company. You could not get the shareholding patterns of even the biggest companies in the country. Today everything is available to people. So the amount of disclosures have gone up. The quality of board and the requirements have gone up. Now the next part is in terms of the introspection that comes into the board so that they are able to create. No one can deny the fact that corporate entities are here to stay, and corporate entities will get more and more regulated because they are getting more and more power, and with it more and more power to cause harm. Therefore, they will get regulated. And use of technology is the only way that we can ensure that people can climb up to the 20th floor without using the stairs. They can use the elevator and reach there at top. Therefore, I believe we are in a good spot today. We have moved a long way, and we have a lot more to do. And this is an exciting journey for all of us to be a part of. Thank you. So, if there are, since this is a small group, all of us have been here. If anyone wants to share anything with regard to either the corporate board valuation practice or anything of good governance that they have seen, which they would like to share, at least the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes we could spend in terms of garnering the collective wisdom we have in the room. It would be extremely unfair, if we go away with only 5 or 6 people having shared our views.
Yeah, this is Sriram. Hearing the panel, it was very insightful. And one of the thoughts that came to me from what Aparna said and Manikanta also said was, I reflect back to last year when I was a member of the ICSI Corporate Governance Award evaluation team, and I was interviewing the independent directors of one of the Nifty 50 companies. And in the process of me having a discussion, the independent director asked me as to what is it that we could do better. See, that openness really showed that one, though it's a Nifty 50 company, the director is bold enough to ask for feedback. And one of the things that I could immediately think of is, have you done an investor perception study, a formal investor perception study? And when Aparna and Manikanta were discussing, I thought, yes, this is something that not many companies are taking 360-degree feedback from investors in a formal manner, either appointing a, and this director was, and it's one of the leading companies in India, and they had not done it, and they thought it's a very robust thing to invite suggestions from investors in a formal manner. I thought that's probably one way to get 360-degree feedback for board evaluation or to.
Anybody else?
Yeah, good evening. Very insightful discussion. Just as Shankar was asking about governance practices, one or two things we'd like to share. Maybe you may be there with the others. I am on the board of a public sector bank. One is the audit committee working as independent of the management and meeting with the auditors on the quarterly results as well as on the internal control systems reporting. When it is arrived on that basis also are meeting the auditors and taking their view, and this has given a good improvement in changing the processes, because whatever the feedback has given by the auditors, that feedback has been communicated to the management, and management has taken action about how to improve the process. Then we meeting independently with the CRO and the chief compliance officers, irrespective of though management person is sitting, only one-to-one meeting. It is independent directors meeting, not the executive directors. Non-executive independent directors meeting with the CRO and the chief compliance officers. So that is another thing. The third, of course, many companies must have done it, whistleblower policy and evolving it and encouraging the employees to raise the issues and a separate committee constituting, and it doesn't go to the board and it is independently evaluated and action has been taken. I thought these things are giving the result I am seeing in the last couple of months. Thought of sharing with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Professor is from IIM Bangalore. Thank you.
Anybody else?
You can introduce yourself, madam. Everyone will get the benefit.
My name is Vidya Rajarao. I'm a chartered accountant, and I was and I continue to. I think I know many of you here, so so I deal with investigating white-collar crime. One question and an observation. In your study, I wanted to know, how did you evaluate boards if a female independent director has been nominated purely based on family connections and not on merit? So what kind of a criteria did you use? And second, what can be done to have more women independent directors who are not related to the family? And because I see a lot of listed companies who have just paid lip service and just have a token women, because she is a wife CEO or wife of the independent director. I don't think that harbors well for governance or evaluation, in my book at least. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Just to clarify, our board evaluation is based on disclosures made by company. So we go by what the company say they have done, not done any investigation beyond whether what they are saying is right or wrong. We had, in terms of, invited Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan for this, who has done extensive research on women directors. Unfortunately, due to some personal commitment, she was not able to make it today. I had asked her one specific question as part of the thing to say, does corporate board evaluation help women director participation, or is it a deterrent, or is it neutral? So she had some interesting study. I'm sorry that we are not able to have her presence, and I'm not articulate enough to share with the insights that she was able to on this particular topic. I hope I'll be able to capture that in a small article or something and publish it soon. But definitely the point you have made, good corporate governance is all about voluntary compliance, is not about mandates. That's why it's very easy for an investor or a serious watcher to be able to make out companies with good governance and companies without. A lot of it deals not just with their behavior in the board, but it deals with their behavior everywhere else. Because you cannot isolate your behavior in one field and behave in a different way in others. So it becomes easy for people to understand companies which have good governance, because you can see that spread across almost all their actions.
I'm Sharada, a practicing company secretary. May I ask a question relating to this panel discussion which we had there, especially to Mr. Krishna Kumar. You are an investor in many early stage companies. You were talking about the requirement for, bringing in board evaluation. Even there, I think you also mentioned that, sir. But it's a candid observation. I am working with a lot of startups. Leave alone the evaluation. I think though investors have a right in the agreement to appoint somebody, the positions themselves are not filled. That's a kind of, most of these startups, the investor nominees are not at all filled. Otherwise, they are there as observers. So if it is not even filled, I don't know what kind of evaluation we are talking of. And I don't know, because it is the requirement at the speed at which these startups are galloping. They don't have time for this governance. It's a closed room, but I think most of us will agree. Most of these startups will just have paper meetings, and it will all be recorded. I don't know, as investors, you said it should be condition precedent, but perhaps if the push comes from there, and in actual implementation, not in the agreements. In agreements, you will have a lot of rights. But I think if the push comes, pardon? I hope it actually becomes a reality. It's an observation, because we are seeing that so many startups coming up, they're all talking of unicorns and their valuations, but we also know what's happening with many leading ones which are failing on the governance aspect.
No, you're absolutely right. If you ask me, does the majority of the startups bother about basic governance process, they do not. Which is why we tell our investee companies that before bothering about valuation, you have to create value. Valuation will always follow if you create value. And that's a very important mindset. And I think, and investors need to bring in that. And since I think Vijay is here, he's a part of Perfios, it's a very successful startup. I think the board governance process there is like any other listed company in terms of thing. So which is why I said that ethos has to come from the management. And if they are not familiar with that, they should consult people and really say, hey, I want to bring in those standards. Today, unfortunately, since we're in a closed room, a lot of startup founders look like seeing a startup as a slot machine. So when do I get a valuation? When do I get a quick exit? They are not bothered about governance. Unfortunately, the media creates this hype. Why is it that people are talking about the unicorn which became a unicorn in 6 months? Why should some media person not talk about a startup which is governed like a listed company? So I think all of us have to bring in that change.
NKK and I need to make a disclosure. We are streaming live on YouTube, so we are not in closed room. Just. No, I'm saying, because both of you prefaced your comment by saying we are in a closed room, I just wanted to. No, I'm fine with it. I thought as an organizer, it was my job to highlight we are streaming live. To be fair, Nakul, we are on live. But since the YouTube has not crashed, I don't think we have so many viewers.
Yeah, and my name is Ravi Vishwanath. I have two comments actually. One on the point that actually Sharda made on startups. I do believe that startups are, need to be treated differently in the sense that if you have too many guardrails for a startup, they probably won't reach where they probably kind of want to. So maybe some kind of a staggered way of governance is something that we need to probably look at from a startup perspective. Because, they are focused on revenues, they are focused on profits, they're focused on so many other things actually. So we probably need to have a structured or a staggered way saying that if you hit certain milestones, certain new things that will come into play is something that we need to probably look at. The second point that I probably had was on the research part of it, the star ratings that you had. If you could probably say how many of them were professionally led versus promoter-led companies in those in those categories, that would be useful to kind of look at how our company is faring actually. Yeah.
In the first 3 years that we published the report, we would name the companies and give the star rating. Then we started selling to listed companies. Then we decided it's not a good sales strategy to talk about it. So we have the data, but we have not overly gone in terms of naming them. So, and I must tell you, our board meetings were more than half a day long.
Thank you so much, Shankar. Take over. Thanks. That sort of brings our evening to the end of the official side of the event. I want to again thank Krishna Kumar, Natarajan, Aparna Iyer, HGS Manikanta, and Ramachandran V for being our esteemed panelists and for launching the two booklets, the report and the booklet. Shankar, thanks for a wonderful presentation that got so many comments and questions. We have pretty much the most of the Simplify team here. We also have Ankit Bafna, who is the Director, Managed Services from Clear. So if you want to know more about any of the products that are not just from the Simplify side, but also from the Clear Tax family, please catch Ankit or any of us who are dressed in the steward kind of clothes wearing Clear banners. The most important part, you come here for the launch of these two documents in that sense, the report and the booklet. These are available there on a table. So I'm sure these are of interest to you. So before you leave for the day, please ensure you have your copies. Please, again, thanks everybody for making time and coming and joining us. And thanks all of you who are still watching us on YouTube Live. We hope you enjoyed the event. Now for the most important part of the evening, we have drinks and dinner served outside. So please make use of the time, network, have your dinner with us, and let's all mingle outside. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Outside this door, so please make way to the drink counter right outside here. Dinner is served further up. You must have seen it as you got to the hall. So dinner is outside to the left side of the hall on the corridor there. Thank you very much.